Blood pooled beneath the unconscious passenger as Dr. Amara Washington's hand froze mid-reach toward her medical credentials. The white flight attendant's words still echoed in the cabin, "We've already got someone handling this." But the someone was merely a college freshman with basic first aid training. Before I dive into this shocking true story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about racial injustice being exposed and overcome. How would you react if you witnessed a medical professional being blocked from saving a life just because of the color of their skin? Let's find out what happened next. Dr. Amara Washington stared out the small oval window as Atlanta's skyline disappeared beneath the clouds. At 38, she had become accustomed to the routine of flying to medical conferences, but this trip felt different. After completing 3 consecutive overnight shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones, making the plush first-class seat feel like an undeserved luxury. "Something to drink before takeoff?" The flight attendant's voice pulled Amara from her thoughts. She looked up to see a blonde woman, her name tag reading Heather Bailey, offering drinks to the passenger across the aisle with a warm smile. When Heather turned to Amara, the smile remained fixed in place, but something changed in her eyes. A subtle coolness, a barely perceptible shift that Amara had grown adept at recognizing throughout her career. "Just water, please," Amara replied, straightening her tailored blazer unconsciously. Heather placed the water on Amara's tray without making eye contact, then moved on with practiced efficiency. The interaction was brief, but familiar. It reminded Amara of her first day as an attending physician at Grady, when a patient had asked to see the real doctor after she'd entered the room. Or the time a nurse had questioned her prescription 3 times before filling it, something Amara noticed didn't happen with her white colleagues. Small moments, each one individually dismissible, collectively exhausting. "First time to San Francisco?" The question came from the man seated beside her, an older gentleman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "No, I go every year for the cardiology conference," Amara replied, grateful for the distraction. "Marcus Reynolds," he offered his hand. "Retired schoolteacher, first time on the West Coast. My wife finally convinced me to take this trip to visit our daughter and her family." Their conversation flowed easily as the plane taxied to the runway. Marcus proudly displayed photos of his grandchildren on his phone, beaming with each swipe of the screen. Amara found herself relaxing, the tension from Heather's cold reception beginning to fade. "Oh," Marcus winced suddenly, pressing a hand to his chest. "Are you all right?" Amara asked, professional instincts immediately kicking in. "Just a bit of indigestion." "Airplane food," he chuckled, though his expression remained tight. "Had a spicy breakfast burrito at the airport. Mistake at my age." Amara nodded, but her trained eye caught details that concerned her, the slight sheen of sweat on his upper lip, the way his left hand occasionally rubbed his shoulder, the slight change in his breathing pattern. Still, when he changed the subject to ask about her work, she didn't press the issue. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, Amara reclined her seat and closed her eyes, hoping to catch some much-needed sleep. But every few minutes, her awareness would shift to Marcus beside her. The sound of his breathing seemed increasingly labored. She opened her eyes to see him loosening his collar, his complexion now ashen. "Mr. Reynolds, are you sure you're feeling all right?" Amara asked, no longer able to ignore the warning signs. "I'll be fine," he insisted, though his voice had weakened. "Don't want to be a bother." Amara recognized the stubbornness, having seen it countless times in the emergency room. Patients, especially older men, often downplayed their symptoms until it was almost too late. She made a mental note to keep monitoring him closely for the remainder of the flight. Little did she know that the subtle signs she was observing would soon escalate into a full-blown crisis at 30,000 feet, one that would test not only her medical abilities but her resolve in the face of discrimination. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into the quiet rhythm of travel. The lights were dimmed, the hum of the engines providing a steady background noise as passengers dozed or watched movies on their screens. Amara had managed to fall into a light sleep, her body desperately claiming the rest it needed. A sharp gasp from beside her snapped her awake. Marcus was clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, his skin clammy to the touch. As Amara's hand instinctively moved to check his pulse, he slumped forward in his seat. "Mr. Reynolds?" Amara called, her voice sharp with urgency. "Marcus?" When he didn't respond, she immediately pressed the call button and unbuckled her seatbelt, shifting into the professional mode that had carried her through countless emergencies. "I need help here," she called out, loud enough to alert nearby passengers but controlled enough not to cause panic. Within moments, Heather hurried down the aisle, her expression shifting from annoyance to alarm as she took in the scene. "What's happening?" she asked, glancing between Amara and Marcus. "He's having a cardiac event, possibly a myocardial infarction," Amara replied, already positioning Marcus to prevent airway obstruction. "I'm Dr. Amara Washington, a cardiologist at Grady Memorial. I need the emergency medical kit immediately." Heather hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We need to follow protocol. I'll make an announcement to see if there are any medical professionals on board." "I just told you, I am a medical professional," Amara stated firmly, reaching into her purse. "Here are my credentials." Heather barely glanced at the Harvard Medical School diploma card and Grady Memorial Hospital ID before turning away. Standing at the front of the cabin section, she made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation. If there are any doctors, nurses, or individuals with medical training on board, please press your call button." Several call buttons lit up, including Amara's. Heather returned to their row, now accompanied by a young white man in his late teens or early 20s. "I'm Tyler Johnson," he introduced himself with the confidence of youth. "I'm pre-med at Michigan State, and I've had lifeguard training with CPR certification." Before Amara could speak, Heather smiled with visible relief. "Perfect. Thank you for stepping up." "I appreciate his willingness to help," Amara interjected, "but I'm a board-certified cardiologist. This man is showing clear signs of cardiac arrest. I need to lead this intervention." Heather positioned herself between Amara and Marcus, creating a physical barrier. "Sir, if you could help move the patient to the aisle where there's more room." "This isn't protocol, this is discrimination," Amara stated bluntly, rising to her full height. "Every second we delay proper treatment decreases his survival chances. You're putting his life at risk." Several passengers were now openly staring. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle whispered something to her husband. A black businessman 3 rows back had removed his headphones and was watching the scene unfold with a frown. As Tyler attempted to move Marcus, the older man's body suddenly went rigid. A seizure gripped him, his teeth clamping down on his tongue. Blood began to trickle from the corner of his mouth, dripping onto his light blue shirt. "He's seizing!" Amara exclaimed, trying to push past Heather. "He needs proper medical attention now." The memory of losing a patient early in her residency flashed through Amara's mind. A 52-year-old woman whose cardiac symptoms had been mistaken for anxiety. Amara had promised herself then that she would never stand by when she could intervene. That promise now propelled her voice to a volume that startled even herself. "This is a life-threatening emergency. Move aside and let me help him." Tyler looked increasingly uncertain, his earlier confidence evaporating as he confronted the reality of the situation. I know CPR, but this seems more severe than what I'm trained for." "Because it is," Amara stated. "Now please, let me do my job." Heather remained unmoved. "We have procedures to follow, ma'am. Please return to your seat while we handle this." The word "ma'am" rang in Amara's ears, stripping away her decade of medical training, reducing her to just another difficult passenger. She felt rage building inside her chest, but knew that losing control would only reinforce whatever stereotypes were at play. "This man will die if he doesn't receive proper medical care immediately," Amara said, each word deliberate and measured. "That will be on you," and I will testify to that fact. The standoff intensified as Tyler knelt beside Marcus, clearly overwhelmed but attempting CPR. His technique was visibly flawed, compressions too shallow, rhythm inconsistent, hands positioned incorrectly on Marcus's chest. "You need to compress deeper, at least 2 inches, Amara instructed, unable to remain silent even as Heather continued blocking her. "And you're compressing too slowly. You need a rate of at least 100 per minute. Heather shot Amara a warning look. "Please let him concentrate." A second flight attendant, a tall black man whose name tag read James Wilson, approached the scene. His expression shifted as he assessed the situation, glancing from Marcus to Tyler to Amara. "What's happening?" he asked, directing his question to Heather. "Medical emergency." "This young man is helping," Heather replied briskly. "Can you bring the medical kit?" James nodded and hurried away, returning moments later with a red bag. He handed it to Heather, who passed it to Tyler. The young man stared at the kit with visible apprehension. "I don't know how to use most of this stuff," he admitted, unzipping the bag to reveal an assortment of medical equipment. "I do," Amara stated firmly. "I use these tools daily. That's an automated external defibrillator, essential for cardiac arrest. There should be amiodarone and epinephrine in there as well." Tyler fumbled with the AED pads, placing them incorrectly on Marcus's chest. "Those need to be positioned differently," Amara said, pulling out her phone. "I'm recording this now. This is medical malpractice happening in real time." Heather's hand shot out toward Amara's phone. "Recording is against airline policy during emergency procedures." "Taking my phone would be theft," Amara replied coldly, continuing to record. "Preventing a qualified doctor from saving a dying man is something far worse." Around them, other passengers had begun to record the scene. The videos would later go viral, capturing the surreal spectacle of a qualified black doctor being prevented from saving a life while an unqualified white student struggled with medical equipment. "This is ridiculous," declared a voice from across the aisle. A white man in his early 50s in an expensive suit stood up. "I've been watching this whole thing, and it makes no sense. Why wouldn't you let the actual doctor help?" "Sir, please return to your seat," Heather instructed. "The name's Nathan Phillips," he replied. "And I'm not sitting down while you're letting someone die for no good reason." The cabin had divided into clear factions. Some passengers voiced support for Amara, while others muttered about following protocol and respecting the airline's authority. The tension was palpable, cutting through the recycled air. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the medical emergency, we're being diverted to Denver International Airport. Our new ETA is approximately 40 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened when the sign is illuminated." 40 minutes. Amara knew Marcus didn't have that long. His skin had taken on a dusky hue, and the irregular rise and fall of his chest indicated his heart was failing. "He's going to flatline before we land," Amara announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I can prevent that, but only if I intervene now." As if confirming her words, the AED that Tyler had finally managed to activate announced in its mechanical voice, "No pulse detected. Begin CPR." Amara made her decision. With a swift, decisive movement, she pushed past Heather, using her shoulder to create space between the flight attendant and Marcus. "This ends now," she declared, taking control of the situation. She repositioned Marcus properly, checked his airway, and began performing CPR with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. "James," she called to the male flight attendant who seemed more reasonable, "I need you to prepare 1 milligram of epinephrine from that kit. Can you do that?" James hesitated, glancing at Heather, who stood stunned by Amara's action. "This man is dying," Amara reminded him. "Make your choice." James nodded and began preparing the injection under Amara's instructions. "What you're doing is against airline policy," Heather warned, her voice tight with anger. "Then write me up," Amara replied without pausing her compressions. But I'm not watching this man die when I can save him. With James's assistance, Amara administered the epinephrine, then continued compressions. After 2 excruciating minutes, the AED detected a faint rhythm. Pulse detected, announced the machine. A collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Marcus wasn't out of danger, but he was alive, for now. Amara positioned herself firmly beside her patient, making it clear she would not be moved again. The remaining 30 minutes to Denver would be critical, and she was prepared to fight anyone who tried to interfere with her care. What she wasn't prepared for was what waited for her when they landed. The wheels of the aircraft touched down on Denver's runway with a jolt that seemed to reverberate through the tense cabin. Throughout the descent, Amara had maintained her position beside Marcus, monitoring his vital signs with the hypervigilance of someone who knew how quickly a stabilized patient could crash again. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, their lights flashing against the twilight sky. As soon as the aircraft doors opened, a team of EMTs rushed aboard, equipment in hand. Suspected myocardial infarction followed by cardiac arrest, Amara reported as they approached. Patient regained pulse after CPR and 1 milligram of epinephrine. Currently stable but critical. The lead paramedic, a woman with cropped gray hair and efficient movements, immediately recognized Amara's professional assessment. "You're a doctor." "Cardiologist, Grady Memorial, Atlanta," Amara confirmed. The EMT nodded with respect, seamlessly incorporating Amara into the handover process. Together, they transferred Marcus to a gurney, attached monitors, and prepared him for transport. "We'll take good care of him from here, doctor," the paramedic assured her. "Thank you for your intervention." The contrast between this respect and Heather's earlier treatment wasn't lost on Amara or the watching passengers. As Marcus was wheeled from the aircraft, a scattered applause broke out from those who had witnessed Amara's perseverance. Near the front of the cabin, Heather huddled with 3 other crew members, their heads bent close as they whispered urgently. Occasionally, one would glance in Amara's direction, their expression unreadable. Amara returned to her seat, suddenly aware of the adrenaline crash leaving her body shaky. She reached for her water bottle, only to be interrupted by a tap on her shoulder. Captain Jeffrey Harrison stood in the aisle, his uniform crisp, his expression a carefully maintained neutral. "Dr. Washington, I'm afraid there's a situation we need to discuss." "What situation?" Amara asked, though she already suspected the answer. "There's been a complaint about your conduct during the emergency," he stated, his voice low but audible to nearby passengers. "Airline security needs to speak with you about the incident." "My conduct?" Amara repeated incredulously. "I saved that man's life despite active obstruction from your flight attendant." The captain's expression didn't change. "Nevertheless, I need all passengers to remain seated while we sort this out. Security will board shortly." As he moved away, Amara became acutely aware of being the focal point of the cabin. Passengers stared openly or pretended not to look. The humiliation of being publicly treated as a perpetrator rather than a hero burned through her exhaustion. Nathan Phillips, the businessman who had spoken up earlier, stood from his seat despite the captain's instructions. "This is outrageous," he announced loudly. "We all saw what happened. This doctor saved that man's life while your staff hindered her every step of the way." Others joined in, their voices creating a chorus of dissent. "I've got the whole thing recorded," called a college-aged girl, holding up her phone. "This is racial profiling," declared an elderly black woman near the back. The cabin door reopened, and 2 individuals in dark suits entered the aircraft. Their presence brought an immediate hush to the protesting voices. "Dr. Amara Washington," called the woman, her FBI badge glinting under the cabin lights. "I'm Agent Laura Bennett. This is Agent Thomas Clark. We need you to come with us for questioning." "On what grounds?" Amara asked, remaining seated. "Interfering with flight crew members and attendants," Agent Clark replied. "It's a federal offense. Please come with us without causing a scene." The irony of his statement, asking her not to cause a scene while they publicly removed her from the aircraft, wasn't lost on Amara or the watching passengers. With as much dignity as she could muster, she gathered her belongings. "You'll need to come to the jetway with us," Agent Bennett added, her tone marginally softer than her partner's. As Amara walked the length of the cabin, she felt the burn of tears threatening behind her eyes. Years of training herself not to show emotion in professional settings helped her maintain composure, but inside, a storm was building. In the narrow jetway, away from the eyes of passengers but visible through the aircraft windows, Agent Clark produced a pair of handcuffs. "Is that really necessary?" Amara asked, her voice finally betraying a tremor. "Standard procedure," he replied without meeting her eyes. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Amara thought about her career, her reputation, her future. How would this affect her standing at the hospital? Would patients trust a doctor who had been handcuffed and removed from an aircraft? Would this incident follow her for the rest of her professional life? They led her through the terminal, past staring travelers, to a small, windowless room in the airport security section. The public humiliation complete, the door closed behind them with a definitive click. "So what do you think about this outrageous situation? Would you have stood up for Dr. Washington if you were on that flight?" Comment 1. If you would have spoken up immediately when you saw the flight attendant blocking a qualified doctor from helping. Did Heather's actions seem motivated by racial bias, or could there be another explanation? Hit that like button if you're furious about this injustice, and subscribe if you want to find out what happens next in this incredible true story. Will Dr. Washington face charges for saving a man's life? Will the airline try to cover this up? The story is just getting started, and you won't believe where it goes next. The airport security room resembled countless interrogation spaces Amara had seen in television crime dramas, but experiencing it firsthand carried a surreal quality. Sterile white walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, uncomfortable chairs, and a one-way mirror reflecting her exhausted face back at her. The handcuffs had been removed once the door closed, but the indignity of wearing them remained imprinted on her wrists like phantom pain. Agents Bennett and Clark positioned themselves across the table, creating a united front. Their contrasting approaches became immediately apparent. Bennett's expression held a hint of sympathy beneath her professional veneer, while Clark's face remained hardened with suspicion. "Let's go over what happened on that flight," Clark began, his pen poised above a notepad. "In your own words." Amara straightened her posture. "I'd like to contact my attorney before making any statement." Clark's mouth tightened. "This would go much smoother if you cooperated, Dr. Washington. We're just trying to understand the situation. And I'm trying to protect myself in a situation where I've already been treated unjustly," Amara replied. "I know my rights." "Your rights," Clark repeated with a subtle emphasis that made the word sound like an accusation rather than an entitlement. Agent Bennett interjected, her tone measured. "That's certainly your prerogative, Dr. Washington. Do you have an attorney you'd like to call?" Amara reached for her phone, relieved they hadn't confiscated it. Her fingers found Jasmine Turner's contact information, a law school friend who had become one of Atlanta's most respected civil rights attorneys. They had maintained their friendship through occasional lunches and the kind of bond that allowed for months without contact but immediate support when needed. The phone rang 3 times before Jasmine's voice came through, professional but warm. "Jasmine, it's Amara. I'm being questioned by FBI agents at Denver International Airport and need your counsel." There was a brief pause before Jasmine responded, her voice shifting to full attorney mode. "Put me on speaker, please." Amara placed the phone on the table between them and activated the speaker function. "This is Jasmine Turner, attorney for Dr. Washington," she announced. "I'm instructing my client not to answer any questions until I arrive. I'm booking the next flight to Denver." "Ms. Turner," Agent Clark began, "this is just a preliminary." "With all due respect, Agent," Jasmine interrupted, "preliminary questioning can still produce statements used in formal proceedings. My client will not be providing any statement without counsel present. Furthermore, I'd like to know the specific allegations against Dr. Washington. Interference with flight crew members and attendants, Clark repeated his earlier statement. It's a serious federal offense. So is obstruction of medical care resulting in harm, Jasmine countered smoothly. I'll be there as soon as possible. Amara, say nothing further. The call ended, leaving a tense silence in the small room. It could be several hours before your attorney arrives from Atlanta, Bennett noted. You might be more comfortable if we resolve this sooner. Amara shook her head. I'll wait. The door opened, and a woman in a navy suit entered, a Delta Airlines identification badge hanging around her neck. Dr. Washington, I'm Diane Foster, Customer Service Director for Delta, she introduced herself with a practiced corporate smile. We'd like to gather some information about today's incident. My client has invoked her right to counsel, Amara stated firmly, channeling Jasmine's confidence. I won't be making any statements until my attorney arrives. Foster's smile didn't waver. Of course, that's your right. I just wanted to inform you that we take these matters very seriously. Flight Attendant Bailey has provided her statement about your aggressive behavior and refusal to follow crew instructions during an emergency, which endangered the passenger in distress. The deliberate mischaracterization of events sent a wave of anger through Amara. That's categorically false. We have procedures in place. Where's the security footage? Amara interrupted. Every commercial aircraft has cabin surveillance. That will show exactly what happened. Foster's smile flickered momentarily. Unfortunately, there seems to have been a technical issue with the recording system on this particular flight. How convenient, Amara remarked, her voice laced with skepticism. Agent Bennett glanced between them, a crease forming between her eyebrows. Ms. Foster, will need any documentation related to this incident, including training protocols for medical emergencies. Of course, Foster nodded. Though I should mention that our flight attendant reports Dr. Washington became physically aggressive when asked to return to her seat, refused to follow safety instructions, and created a situation that compromised passenger care. The door swung open again before Amara could respond to these false allegations. A woman with tightly coiled hair pulled back in a professional bun strode in, emanating an aura of controlled authority that immediately shifted the room's energy. Jasmine? Amara stood, momentarily confused. How did you get here so quickly? I was in Colorado Springs for a conference, Jasmine explained, setting her briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. Fortunate timing. She extended her hand to the agents. Jasmine Turner, representing Dr. Washington. After brief introductions, Jasmine turned to Diane Foster. And you are? Diane Foster, Delta Airlines. Excellent. Then you can explain why your employee prevented a licensed medical doctor from providing life-saving care to a passenger in cardiac arrest. Foster's corporate smile remained in place. Our flight attendants are trained to follow specific protocols during medical emergencies. Do those protocols include ignoring board-certified physicians in favor of college students with basic first aid training? Jasmine interrupted, her voice precise as a scalpel. Or is that discretionary based on the physician's race? That's an inflammatory accusation, Foster replied, her smile finally faltering. It's a relevant question, Jasmine countered, opening her briefcase and removing a tablet. Particularly given these. She slid the tablet across the table, displaying a collection of news articles and social media posts. 3 incidents in the past 18 months where medical professionals of color were questioned or prevented from providing emergency assistance on Delta flights, Jasmine explained for the agent's benefit. All 3 involved the same procedural justification Ms. Foster just cited. Agent Bennett picked up the tablet, scrolling through the articles with increasing interest. Furthermore, Jasmine continued, my office has been contacted by 2 passengers from today's flight who have provided video documentation contradicting Ms. Foster's characterization of events. A commotion outside the door interrupted the conversation. Through the small window, Amara could see a gathering crowd in the corridor, passengers from the flight, many with phones raised, filming the security area. It appears public sentiment doesn't align with your narrative either, Jasmine observed. Agent Clark rose from his seat, clearly annoyed by the disruption outside. I'll handle this. As he left the room, Jasmine turned her attention to Agent Bennett. Agent, I'd like to discuss the basis for detaining my client. Saving a man's life, even against the misguided obstruction of a flight attendant, hardly constitutes interference with crew duties as interpreted by any reasonable application of federal aviation regulations. Bennett nodded slowly. I tend to agree, Ms. Turner. This appears to be an airline complaint rather than a federal case. Then I suggest we conclude this unnecessary detention, Jasmine stated firmly. Dr. Washington has patients who depend on her, and she's already been delayed from her medical conference. A knock at the door preceded Clark's return, his expression tense. There's a situation developing. The passenger Dr. Washington treated, his family is here. They're demanding to speak with whoever saved him. Is he? Amara couldn't finish the question. He's alive, Clark confirmed. Thanks to you, according to the emergency room doctor. The acknowledgement, small as it was, felt like the first truth spoken in the room. Jasmine gathered her materials. Unless you're formally charging my client, which I strongly advise against given the circumstances and public attention, we're leaving now. Bennett exchanged a look with Clark before nodding. Dr. Washington is free to go, but we may need additional statements later. Contact me directly, Jasmine handed Bennett her card. And Ms. Foster? I suggest your airline prepare for significant legal scrutiny. Dr. Washington was ticketed for a connecting flight to San Francisco this evening. I trust Delta will accommodate her on another carrier since she's been banned from your flights during this investigation. Foster's face revealed this was indeed the airline's position. That's standard procedure during incident reviews. We'll add that to our filing, then, Jasmine replied smoothly. The court of public opinion is already in session, and I don't think the verdict is looking favorable for Delta. As they left the interrogation room, Amara was struck by the crowd that had gathered, not just passengers from the flight but airport staff, travelers, and what appeared to be local news crews. Jasmine, she whispered, what's happening? What's happening, Jasmine replied quietly, is that while Delta was trying to bury this story, the passengers were ensuring it would be heard. #Dr. Whileblack is trending nationwide. Your hospital has issued a statement of support. And Marcus Reynolds' family is waiting to thank the woman who saved his life despite every obstacle thrown in her way. The morning light streamed through the hotel room curtains, casting a warm glow that contrasted with the cold knot in Amara's stomach as she stared at her phone screen. After finally checking into a Denver hotel at midnight, courtesy of a competing airline that had offered her complimentary accommodation, she had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Now, fully awake at 6 a.m., she scrolled through an overwhelming flood of notifications. The incident had exploded across social media overnight. Video clips from multiple angles showed the confrontation on the plane, each one more damning than the last. One particularly viral clip captured the moment Heather physically positioned herself between Amara and Marcus while allowing Tyler to fumble with medical equipment. National news networks had picked up the story, their morning shows featuring heated discussions about discrimination in healthcare and aviation. Amara's credentials were displayed prominently: Harvard Medical School graduate, board-certified cardiologist, clinical excellence awards, juxtaposed against images of her being led off the plane in handcuffs. Delta's statement appeared equally prominently: we take all passenger concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation of the incident. Our flight attendants are trained to follow specific protocols during medical emergencies to ensure passenger safety. We cannot comment further on an ongoing investigation. The corporate non-answer read like a template, devoid of acknowledgement or accountability. The contrast between their sanitized response and the raw reality captured on video only intensified public outrage. A gentle knock on the door pulled Amara from her doom-scrolling. Jasmine stood outside, already dressed in a crisp pantsuit despite the early hour, a tablet tucked under her arm and 2 coffee cups in hand. I figured you'd be awake, she said, offering one of the cups. The hotel restaurant doesn't open until 7, but I charmed these out of the kitchen staff. Amara accepted the coffee gratefully. Have you seen what's happening online? I've seen little else since 3 a.m., Jasmine confirmed, settling into the armchair by the window. Grady Memorial released a statement of support at midnight. Your colleagues are organizing shifts to cover your patients. Dr. Ellington, your department chair, right? Gave an impassioned interview about your clinical excellence. The support from her hospital community provided a small comfort amidst the chaos. Amara had always kept her head down, focused on her work rather than hospital politics. She hadn't realized how many allies she had until now. There's more, Jasmine continued, swiping through her tablet. Marcus Reynolds is stable and recovering. His wife Eleanor gave an interview from the hospital waiting room that's, well, see for yourself. She handed the tablet to Amara, who pressed play on the video. A dignified black woman in her 60s appeared on screen, her eyes tired but fierce as she addressed a cluster of microphones. My husband is alive today because Dr. Amara Washington refused to be silenced, Eleanor stated firmly. The doctors here confirmed that without her intervention, Marcus would have died before landing. Instead of honoring her courage and expertise, they put her in handcuffs. I want to know why. The reporter asked if she believed race played a factor. Eleanor's response was measured but unflinching. My husband and I grew up in the Jim Crow South. We recognize discrimination when we see it, even when it hides behind policies and protocols. What happened on that plane was wrong, and someone needs to be held accountable. Amara handed the tablet back, unexpectedly moved by Eleanor's words. They seem like remarkable people. They're asking to meet you, Jasmine said. When you're ready. A notification chimed on both their phones simultaneously. Jasmine checked hers first, her expression darkening. Delta's stock opened down 4%, she reported. They're feeling the pressure financially now. Another notification followed quickly. A conservative news commentator had weighed in, suggesting that professional demeanor may have played a role in the flight attendant's response. Code 4, angry black woman, Amara translated bitterly. Exactly what I'd expect from them, Jasmine agreed. They're trying to shift the narrative from discrimination to your behavior, suggesting you were somehow threatening or unprofessional. I remained calmer than most people would have in that situation, Amara said, the frustration evident in her voice. I had to. We always have to. I know, Jasmine replied quietly. The shared understanding between them required no further elaboration. The past 12 hours had thrust Amara into an unwanted spotlight. She'd become both a symbol and a target, her private identity subsumed by public narrative. The weight of sudden notoriety pressed against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Jasmine, ever perceptive, recognized the signs of overwhelm. You don't have to do any interviews or make any statements today. We can focus on getting you home or to your conference, whichever you prefer. I can't focus on cardiology research while this is happening, Amara admitted. But I don't know if I can face cameras either. Her phone rang, an unknown number with an Atlanta area code. Jasmine took it, putting the call on speaker. Dr. Washington's phone, this is her attorney speaking. This is Richard Palmer, CEO of Delta Airlines, came a deep voice, polished with corporate authority. I'd like to speak with Dr. Washington privately about yesterday's unfortunate incident. Jasmine raised an eyebrow at Amara, who nodded cautiously. Dr. Washington is here, Mr. Palmer. You're on speaker, and I'm present as her counsel. I understand, Palmer replied smoothly. Dr. Washington, first let me express my personal regret about your experience. This situation has clearly escalated beyond what anyone intended. I'd like to meet with you today to discuss resolution paths forward. What kind of resolution are you envisioning? Jasmine asked before Amara could respond. I believe this matter would be best addressed in person rather than over the phone, Palmer deflected. We could meet at our Denver offices this afternoon. We're prepared to offer appropriate compensation for Dr. Washington's inconvenience. The careful wording, inconvenience rather than discrimination or mistreatment, didn't escape either woman's notice. We'll consider your invitation and get back to you, Jasmine replied diplomatically. After ending the call, she turned to Amara. They're scared. The CEO doesn't make personal calls unless the situation is critical. What do you think they'll offer? A substantial settlement with a non-disclosure agreement, Jasmine predicted. They want this to go away quickly and quietly. Amara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, absorbing its warmth. A week ago, I might have taken it. Signed whatever they wanted, avoided the publicity, returned to my regular life. And now? Before Amara could answer, her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained a photograph of an older black woman in a white coat, standing beside a hospital bed in what appeared to be the 1960s. A second message followed. My mother was one of the first black female doctors in Georgia. She faced these battles so we could fight new ones. Don't let them silence you. Dr. William Chen, Denver Health, attending physician for Marcus Reynolds. The unexpected alliance brought tears to Amara's eyes. She showed the message to Jasmine, who nodded thoughtfully. So what's it going to be? Jasmine asked. The quick settlement or the longer fight? Amara thought of her mother, who had cleaned hospital rooms at night while studying nursing textbooks by day. She thought of her mentors who had faced their own battles with discrimination in medicine. She thought of future black doctors who would board planes wearing their credentials like armor, still insufficient against prejudice. We fight, she decided. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been in this position without the cameras rolling. Then we'll need to prepare for a marathon, not a sprint, Jasmine cautioned. Delta has resources and experience handling PR crises. So do we, Amara replied, her resolve strengthening. We have the truth. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass-fronted building in downtown Denver, offering panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains that seemed to mock the tension inside Conference Room C. Amara sat beside Jasmine, facing a table of airline executives whose collective annual salaries could fund an entire hospital wing. Richard Palmer, Delta's CEO, sat center position, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority and trustworthiness, an image carefully crafted for shareholder meetings and press conferences. To his right, Victoria Hamilton, the airline's chief legal counsel, arranged documents with practiced precision, occasionally glancing at Amara with clinical assessment. Two other executives flanked them, their presence designed to create an impression of overwhelming corporate force. Dr. Washington, Palmer began after introductions concluded, let me start by saying how grateful we are that you were able to assist our passenger during his medical emergency. Customer safety is our highest priority at Delta. The practiced sincerity in his voice didn't reach his eyes. This was a negotiation, not an apology. If that were true, Jasmine interjected, your flight attendant would have welcomed Dr. Washington's assistance rather than obstructing it. Palmer's smile tightened. Individual employees sometimes make judgment calls in high-pressure situations that don't align perfectly with company values. That's why we're here today, to address this unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Amara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Is that what you call it when your employee prevented a physician from saving a dying man's life because of the color of her skin? That's a serious accusation, Victoria Hamilton spoke for the first time, her voice crisp. One that implies intent we don't believe existed. Intent isn't required for discrimination, counselor, Jasmine countered. Impact is what matters legally. Hamilton's lips pursed momentarily before she continued. Regardless, Delta is prepared to offer Dr. Washington a settlement that acknowledges the distress caused by this incident. She slid a document across the table. Jasmine intercepted it, scanning the contents quickly before passing it to Amara. The figure on the page momentarily took Amara's breath away. It represented more money than she made in 2 years at Grady Memorial, enough to pay off her remaining medical school loans, put a down payment on a house, establish financial security that many physicians her age still struggled to achieve. This settlement includes a standard non-disclosure agreement, Hamilton explained unnecessarily. Dr. Washington would agree not to discuss the incident publicly or disparage Delta Airlines or its employees. "You want to buy my silence," Amara translated. Palmer leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of practiced empathy. "We want to make this right, Dr. Washington. This offer recognizes the inconvenience and distress you experienced." "Inconvenience," Amara repeated, the corporate euphemism fueling her resolve. "Mr. Palmer, I was handcuffed and removed from an airplane after saving a man's life. That goes beyond inconvenience." Palmer nodded as though he understood completely. "The amount reflects the seriousness with which we view this situation." Hamilton interjected smoothly, "We've also prepared some additional information for your consideration." She produced a folder containing printouts of social media comments about the incident. Amara recognized them immediately, she'd seen similar ones on her own feeds. Hamilton had carefully selected the most vitriolic and racist responses, along with comments questioning Amara's professionalism. "Public attention can be difficult to manage," Hamilton observed with false concern. "These conversations tend to bring out extreme viewpoints and can follow professionals for years. Our offer provides a path to closure that protects your reputation and privacy." The implied threat was clear: fight us publicly, and these voices will only get louder. Jasmine placed a calming hand on Amara's arm before addressing the executives. "If you're suggesting Dr. Washington should fear public scrutiny, I should inform you that we've already received statements of support from the American Medical Association, the National Medical Association, and the Association of Black Cardiologists. The court of public opinion seems firmly in our favor." Palmer's expression hardened slightly at this pushback. "The offer on the table is generous by any standard. We recommend you consider it carefully." A knock at the conference room door interrupted the standoff. A young assistant entered, whispering something to Palmer that caused his expression to shift from confidence to concern. "Excuse me a moment," he said, rising from his seat and stepping out of the room. In his absence, Victoria Hamilton continued her subtle pressure tactics. "Dr. Washington, litigation is unpredictable, expensive, and often ultimately unsatisfying for all parties. This settlement guarantees resolution without years of legal battles." "What it guarantees is that nothing changes," Amara replied. "Your flight attendant continues working, your protocols remain unchanged, and the next black doctor who tries to help someone gets the same treatment. Our training protocols are constantly evolving," one of the other executives offered weakly. Before further discussion could unfold, the door opened again. Palmer returned, accompanied by an unexpected figure, a man in a white coat with a hospital ID badge. "I apologize for the interruption," the newcomer stated, his gaze fixed on Amara. "I'm Dr. William Chen, the attending physician who treated Marcus Reynolds after your intervention." The executives exchanged confused glances, clearly wondering how this unscheduled participant had gained access to their private meeting. "Dr. Washington," Chen continued, "I came here directly from the hospital because I needed to tell you and these executives something important. Marcus Reynolds experienced complications overnight related to the delayed and improper initial treatment he received on that plane." The room fell silent as the implications of his statement registered. "Without your intervention, he would have died before landing," Dr. Chen stated definitively. "Even with your help, the initial mismanagement caused damage that could have been avoided with prompt, appropriate care. As the physician who's treated him since arrival, I can state unequivocally that the obstruction you faced directly contributed to Mr. Reynolds' current condition." Victoria Hamilton recovered first. "Dr. Chen, this is a private meeting. Your interruption is inappropriate and potentially violates patient confidentiality." "I have the Reynolds family's explicit permission to discuss his case," Chen replied calmly. "They asked me to come here when they learned about this settlement meeting." He turned back to Amara. "The medical community in Denver stands with you. Whatever they're offering, it's not worth the silence they're demanding." Amara felt something shift inside her, a crystallization of purpose that dissolved any remaining doubt. She closed the folder containing the settlement offer and slid it back across the table. "I'm declining your offer," she stated firmly. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the FAA, EEOC, and other relevant regulatory bodies. I'm also preparing to pursue legal action for discrimination, negligence, defamation, and emotional distress." Palmer's corporate mask slipped momentarily, revealing the calculation beneath. "That would be an unfortunate choice, Dr. Washington. Our legal team is prepared to vigorously defend Delta's reputation and protocols. And I'm prepared to defend the truth," Amara replied, rising from her seat. "Unlike your flight attendant, I won't stand by when something is wrong just because it's more convenient." As they gathered their belongings to leave, Jasmine added one final point. "Mr. Palmer, you should know that we've been contacted by 3 other minority medical professionals who experienced similar discrimination on Delta flights. They've been hesitant to come forward individually, but they're willing to join Dr. Washington in a class action suit." The executive's expressions confirmed they hadn't known about these additional cases, information that would significantly strengthen Amara's position and multiply the airline's potential liability. In the elevator descending from the law offices, Dr. Chen turned to Amara. "I hope I didn't overstep by coming here." "You didn't," she assured him. "Thank you for your support. The medical community needs to stand together against discrimination," he replied simply. "My mother faced similar barriers throughout her career. She taught me that change only happens when someone refuses to accept the status quo." As they exited the building into the bright Colorado sunshine, Amara felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since the incident, she felt certain of her direction. "You okay?" Jasmine asked, recognizing the shift in Amara's demeanor. "Better than okay," Amara replied. "I'm ready." The Federal Aviation Administration hearing room buzzed with subdued conversation as attendees filed in and took their seats. Unlike a courtroom with its public gallery, this administrative proceeding had a more intimate setup, though its formal atmosphere and potential consequences were no less significant. The wood-paneled walls and government seal projected authority, while the arrangement of tables created clear delineations between the 3-member FAA panel, Delta's representatives, and Amara's team. 3 months had passed since the incident on Flight 3578. In that time, what began as a viral social media moment had evolved into a formal investigation with potentially industry-changing implications. For Amara, the intervening months had been a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and preparation, all while maintaining her clinical responsibilities at Grady Memorial. Jasmine sat beside her, reviewing notes one final time before proceedings began. Their table also included Dr. William Chen, who had become an important ally and expert witness, and a paralegal meticulously organizing exhibits. Across the aisle, Delta's team had assembled an impressive array of legal talent. Victoria Hamilton led a team of 4 attorneys, their matching navy suits creating a visual wall of corporate solidarity. Behind them sat Heather Bailey, dressed conservatively in a gray suit that downplayed her usual blonde highlights, her expression carefully neutral. The panel chairperson, a retired judge named Lawrence Michaels, called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "This hearing concerns the events aboard Delta Airlines Flight 3578 on April 17, 2025, he announced. "The Federal Aviation Administration is investigating allegations of discrimination, improper emergency response procedures, and potential violations of passenger safety regulations." He outlined the day's agenda before inviting Delta to present their position first. Victoria Hamilton approached the podium with practiced confidence. "The events aboard Flight 3578 represent an unfortunate miscommunication during a high-stress medical emergency," she began. "Delta Airlines has comprehensive protocols designed to ensure passenger safety during in-flight emergencies. These protocols include procedures for verifying medical credentials and establishing clear chains of command." Hamilton methodically constructed a narrative that portrayed Heather as a conscientious employee following established procedures in a chaotic situation. According to this version of events, Amara had become confrontational when asked to follow standard protocol, creating confusion that impeded the emergency response. Flight attendant Bailey was simply attempting to establish order during a crisis, Hamilton concluded. Her actions were consistent with her training and Delta's commitment to passenger safety. When Heather took the stand, she delivered tearful testimony about feeling threatened by Amara's aggressive behavior. "I was just trying to follow procedure," she insisted, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Dr. Washington kept insisting on taking control, and I was responsible for maintaining order in the cabin. I felt intimidated and concerned for everyone's safety." Jasmine's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. "Ms. Bailey, could you please explain the protocol for verifying medical credentials during an in-flight emergency?" Heather hesitated. "We're trained to request identification and verify qualifications." "And did Dr. Washington provide her medical credentials?" "Yes, but..." "A simple yes is sufficient," Jasmine interjected. "Now, according to your training, what criteria should be used to determine which medical professional takes lead during an emergency when multiple volunteers are available?" Heather's confidence visibly wavered. "We're supposed to consider their qualifications and experience. So between a board-certified cardiologist with 10 years of experience and a pre-med student with basic CPR training, your protocol would clearly indicate the cardiologist should lead, correct?" "It's not always that simple in the moment," Heather deflected. "Actually, Ms. Bailey, it is that simple," Jasmine countered. "That's precisely why protocols exist, to provide clear guidance during high-pressure situations." The morning proceeded with Delta presenting additional witnesses, including training personnel who testified about the airline's emergency procedures. Each testimony reinforced their central narrative: Heather had followed protocol, and any negative outcome resulted from Amara's refusal to comply with crew instructions. After a brief lunch recess, it was Amara's turn to testify. As she took her seat before the panel, she felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same composure that carried her through complex cardiac procedures and high-stakes medical emergencies. "Dr. Washington," Jasmine began, "please describe your medical qualifications and experience." Amara outlined her education at Harvard Medical School, her residency at Johns Hopkins, and her current position as an attending cardiologist at Grady Memorial Hospital, where she regularly treated cardiac emergencies similar to what Marcus Reynolds experienced. "When you identified yourself to Flight Attendant Bailey, what response did you receive?" "She barely glanced at my credentials before dismissing them," Amara recalled. "When she made the announcement requesting medical help, I pressed my call button along with others, but when she returned to our row, she immediately focused on Tyler Johnson, the student who volunteered." "Did she provide any explanation for bypassing your expertise in favor of Mr. Johnson's limited training?" "No," Amara replied. "When I attempted to offer guidance as Mr. Johnson struggled with the medical equipment, she physically positioned herself between me and the patient, stating that I needed to let him concentrate." As Amara recounted the events in precise, clinical detail, the contrast between her composed professionalism and Heather's earlier emotional testimony was striking. Where Heather had portrayed a scene of chaos and intimidation, Amara described a clear pattern of obstruction that delayed critical care. The most surprising testimony came after the mid-afternoon break, when James Wilson, the second flight attendant who had been present during the incident, was called to testify. Delta's attorneys shifted uncomfortably as he took the stand, suggesting his appearance wasn't part of their planned presentation. "Mr. Wilson," Jasmine began, "you were working alongside Heather Bailey during the incident in question, correct?" "Yes," he confirmed. "I was responsible for the aft cabin section but came forward when the medical emergency was announced." "In your observation, did Dr. Washington at any point behave aggressively or threaten flight crew members?" Wilson paused, glancing briefly at the Delta representatives before answering. "No, she did not. She was insistent about providing medical care, but her behavior was professional throughout." A murmur rippled through the hearing room. This testimony directly contradicted Heather's claims. "Mr. Wilson, in your experience with Delta, Have you observed any patterns in how medical emergencies involving minority medical professionals are handled? Victoria Hamilton shot to her feet. Objection. This calls for speculation and goes beyond the scope of this witness's expertise. The panel chair considered momentarily before overruling. The witness may answer based on his personal observations and experience. Wilson shifted uncomfortably. There have been discussions among crew members about verifying credentials more thoroughly when the person doesn't look the part of a doctor. Could you elaborate on what looking the part means in these contexts? Wilson took a deep breath. It's generally understood to mean older white males. There's been unofficial guidance to be more cautious with women, especially women of color, claiming medical expertise. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. I have text messages from Ms. Bailey and other crew members that demonstrate this bias. Victoria Hamilton's objection was immediate and vehement, but the damage was done. After reviewing the messages, the panel chair admitted them into evidence, noting they appeared relevant to establishing patterns of behavior. The texts revealed Heather's history of problematic comments about minority passengers and crew members, including specific instances where she had questioned the credentials of non-white professionals. Tyler Johnson, the pre-med student, testified next. Now months removed from the incident and no longer under the airline's influence, he appeared visibly uncomfortable as he admitted his limitations. I was completely out of my depth, he confessed. I know CPR basics from lifeguard certification, but I've never used an AED before, never administered emergency medications. When Dr. Washington tried to instruct me on proper technique, I wanted to listen, but the flight attendant kept telling me to focus and ignore her. The most dramatic moment came when a technology expert testified about recovering the supposedly missing footage from the aircraft's surveillance system. Despite claims of technical failure, we were able to recover approximately 80% of the video data from the flight, the expert explained, queuing up the footage on monitors throughout the hearing room. The video directly contradicted Heather's testimony, clearly showing Amara's professional demeanor and Heather's active obstruction. Most damning was footage of Heather physically blocking Amara while allowing Tyler to struggle with equipment he didn't know how to use. A stir at the back of the room interrupted proceedings as an elderly man in a wheelchair was escorted in, accompanied by a woman Amara recognized from news footage as Eleanor Reynolds. The panel recognizes Marcus Reynolds and permits his testimony, the chairman announced, surprising Delta's legal team who had apparently not been informed of this last-minute witness. As Marcus was positioned before the panel, his gaze found Amara, and he smiled warmly in recognition. Mr. Reynolds, Jasmine began gently, could you share your recollection of the events on Flight 3578? I remember feeling the pain start, he recounted, his voice strong despite his physically weakened state. Like an elephant sitting on my chest. Dr. Washington noticed right away, kept checking on me even when I insisted I was fine. He described drifting in and out of consciousness during the crisis but had clear memories of certain moments. I remember her voice, calm but urgent, saying she was a doctor and needed to help me. I remember the flight attendant blocking her, and feeling myself slipping away while they argued. I could hear everything, but couldn't speak or move. His testimony brought a human dimension to the proceedings that transcended legal arguments and corporate policies. This wasn't just about discrimination or protocols, it was about a man who nearly died while qualified help was actively prevented from reaching him. Dr. Washington saved my life, he stated simply. The hospital doctors confirmed it. If she hadn't eventually pushed past that flight attendant, I wouldn't be here today. In the final phase of the hearing, Victoria Hamilton attempted to redirect the narrative, presenting internal Delta communications that characterized the incident as a misunderstanding rather than discrimination. But the documents revealed something else entirely, a corporate damage control strategy focused on protecting the airline's reputation rather than addressing the underlying issues. These emails show Delta's leadership discussing how to contain the PR problem and limit liability, Jasmine pointed out. Not once do they mention improving training or addressing potential bias in their emergency response protocols. As the hearing concluded its first day, the shift in momentum was palpable. What Delta had clearly hoped would be a procedural formality validating their position had instead exposed systemic issues that could no longer be ignored. Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered, sensing the significance of the day's revelations. Amara declined interviews, allowing Jasmine to make a brief statement emphasizing their commitment to pursuing accountability and systemic change. Later that evening, in the quiet of her hotel room, Amara received a text from Jasmine. Panel is scheduling an executive session tomorrow morning before formal proceedings resume. Sources say they're already drafting recommendations against Delta. We've got them on the ropes. For the first time since this ordeal began, Amara allowed herself to believe that real change might actually result from her decision to fight rather than settle. The system that had initially handcuffed her was now being forced to acknowledge its failures, and perhaps, finally, address them. 6 months after the FAA hearing, Amara stood at the podium of the American College of Cardiology's annual conference in San Francisco, the very event she had been traveling to when Flight 3578 changed the course of her life. The irony wasn't lost on her as she adjusted the microphone, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. I want to thank the conference committee for adding this special session on addressing bias in medical emergency response, she began. When I was invited to speak, I realized this would have been my destination that day, though under very different circumstances. The packed auditorium included not just cardiologists but representatives from major airlines, hospital administrators, and medical educators. In the front row sat Marcus and Eleanor Reynolds, both beaming with pride. Marcus had made a remarkable recovery, though the delayed treatment had resulted in some permanent heart damage that limited his activity levels. The events aboard that flight revealed systemic problems that extend far beyond one flight attendant or one airline, Amara continued. They exposed how implicit bias creates barriers to care that can literally become matters of life and death. The changes that had occurred in the 6 months since the hearing had exceeded even Jasmine's optimistic predictions. The FAA panel had ruled decisively in Amara's favor, recommending substantial sanctions against Delta and mandatory reforms to their emergency response training. Rather than appeal, Delta had chosen to implement comprehensive changes, recognizing that the publicity surrounding the case had created a unique opportunity to position themselves as industry leaders in addressing bias. Heather Bailey had been terminated from her position, and was now facing separate civil charges filed by the Reynolds family. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, with terms that remained confidential but were rumored to include significant compensation for the permanent health impacts Marcus had suffered due to delayed care. What matters most isn't the individual consequences, Amara emphasized in her presentation. What matters is the structural change we've begun to implement. Those changes included a new industry-wide credentialing system that Amara had helped design. Medical professionals could now register their qualifications in a secure database accessible during emergencies, providing objective verification that eliminated subjective judgments by flight crew. Delta had been the first to adopt it, with other major carriers quickly following suit. Airlines across the industry had revised their training protocols to include specific modules on recognizing and counteracting bias in emergency situations. The American Medical Association had launched a parallel initiative addressing similar issues in hospital settings, creating a broader conversation about how prejudice impacted healthcare delivery across contexts. When I declined Delta's settlement offer, Amara revealed, many questioned that decision. The amount would have paid off my medical school loans and provided significant financial security. But it came with silence, and some costs are too high to accept. Instead of accepting personal compensation, Amara had worked with Jasmine to establish the Credentials Shouldn't Have Color Foundation, providing scholarships and mentorship for minority students pursuing medical careers. Delta, as part of their rehabilitative efforts, had become one of the foundation's principal corporate sponsors, a development that still occasionally made Amara laugh at its improbability. After her presentation, as attendees mingled during the reception, a young black woman in her early 20s approached Amara tentatively. "Dr. Washington. I'm Zoe Taylor, second-year medical student at UCSF. I just wanted to thank you personally for the presentation." Amara asked, smiling warmly. "For everything," Zoe replied. "When I was in high school, I wanted to be a doctor but didn't think people like me belonged in medicine. Seeing you stand your ground, watching how you turned that terrible experience into positive change, it confirmed I was on the right path." Conversations like this had become increasingly common for Amara. Though she had never sought the spotlight, she had come to recognize the power of visibility and representation. Every young person who saw themselves reflected in her story represented potential transformation in a field that still struggled with diversity and inclusion. Later that evening, as Amara prepared to board her flight home to Atlanta, she experienced the subtle shift that had become familiar in recent months. The gate agent checked her boarding pass, then glanced up with a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Have a pleasant flight, Dr. Washington," she said, with an emphasis on the title that acknowledged more than professional courtesy. On board, the lead flight attendant approached as passengers settled into their seats. "Dr. Washington, I want to personally welcome you aboard. If there are any medical emergencies during our flight, we have your credentials already verified in our system." The preemptive acknowledgement represented exactly the kind of procedural change Amara had fought for: recognition based on qualifications rather than assumptions, systems designed to eliminate the influence of bias. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Amara felt the familiar sensation of acceleration and liftoff. A moment of turbulence shook the cabin briefly, causing a few nervous glances among passengers. 6 months ago, the bumpy air might have triggered Amara's own trauma response, bringing back memories of handcuffs and humiliation. Now, she remained calm, recognizing it as merely a routine part of air travel. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be entirely. The experience had left marks on her, changing how she moved through professional spaces, creating a heightened awareness of how her identity shaped others' perceptions. But alongside the lingering pain existed a profound sense of purpose. Sometimes transformation required turbulence. As the seatbelt sign switched off with a cheerful ding, Amara reclined her seat slightly and closed her eyes, allowing herself to truly rest for the first time in a journey that had begun 6 months earlier on another flight, at another moment of crisis, when she had made the crucial decision to stand her ground rather than stand aside. The road to justice was rarely smooth, but it was a path worth traveling, not just for herself, but for all those who would follow. Dr. Washington's story highlights several profound truths about confronting discrimination. First, systemic change rarely happens without individual courage. By refusing to accept the settlement and its accompanying silence, Amara created ripples that transformed an entire industry. Second, documentation proves crucial in fighting injustice. The passenger videos and recovered surveillance footage became irrefutable evidence that countered false narratives. Third, allies matter immensely. From Dr. Chen stepping forward at a critical moment to James Wilson breaking ranks to reveal institutional bias, support from unexpected quarters often tips the scales toward justice. Fourth, preparation meets opportunity. Amara's lifetime of excellence positioned her to be credible when credibility was questioned. Most importantly, the story reminds us that discrimination persists not because of a few bad actors, but through systems that enable bias. Real progress requires examining and reforming these systems rather than simply punishing individuals. When credentials are questioned based on appearance rather than qualifications, we all lose access to talent, expertise, and potentially life-saving care. Have you witnessed racial discrimination in professional settings? How did you respond? Comment below with your experiences. If Dr. Washington's story moved you to think differently about standing up against injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful racism stories that inspire change. Remember that your voice matters. Sometimes speaking up in the moment can prevent harm and create accountability. Share this video with someone who needs courage to challenge discrimination in their workplace or community. Thank you for joining this important conversation about confronting racism stories that happen every day in America. Until next time, stay vigilant and committed to creating more equitable spaces for everyone.